In Iowa City, Iowa, smack dab in the middle of America's heartland, Scott Christiansen reviews his latest research. It's about two men's transatlantic friendship and shared obsession, both of which resulted from their strong admiration for a remarkable group of immigrants known as the 48ers. So who were the 48ers? Why do they draw such obsessive attention from a select group of historians and genealogists? To better understand the significance of these immigrants, so many of whom immigrated from Germany and settled in America's Midwest, we must travel back in time to the year 1848. The revolutions of 1848, often referred to as the Spring of Nations, saw a revolutionary wave begin in France and wash over much of Europe. In over 50 countries, Europe's old order was confronted with an explosion of frustration and resentment from the common man. His exclusion from political life and lack of basic freedoms, the onerous burden of late feudal privileges, and incipient feelings of nationalism all coalesced, making the outbreak of violence inevitable. Although the revolutions threw a scare into those holding the reins of power, they were unable to dislodge them. Instead, they ushered in a harsh reactionary period, making life miserable for so many who had fought with both pen and sword for the cause of freedom, democracy, and national unity. Many of these unsuccessful democratic revolutionaries from Germany's northernmost state of Schleswig-Holstein left their beloved homeland, immigrated to the land of the free and the home of the brave, and settled in and around Davenport, Iowa.
Interestingly, Claussen and his friend Theodor Olshausen, two 48ers that settled in Davenport, were two of the 21 individuals excluded from the Danish king's amnesty following the conclusion of the Schleswig-Holstein War of 1848 to 50.
So they didn't come because they were adventurous. They had to leave Europe, Schleswig-Holstein, Denmark.
Yeah, they actually left before they were excluded from the amnesty because they knew that they were going to be excluded from the amnesty.
I recall one speech of Reimer Claussen in Frankfurt where he stressed that the American Constitution should be the role model for a German constitution.
Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of a fact that after many of these active politicians were forced to leave for America and establish their newspapers and periodicals, some of those very publications eventually became banned in Germany for the depth of their democratic ideals.
Interestingly, Davenport, Iowa, a town founded less than 15 years earlier, became the adopted home for many of these politically active Schleswig-Holsteiners who were ready to both secure and maintain freedoms they'd unsuccessfully fought for in their homeland. At some point, Davenport became the most German city, not only in the state, but in all the Middle West, the center of all German activities in the state.
When a lot of the 48ers that Yogi and I are so enamored with left Hamburg and sailed to New York, it was often a 40 to 50 to 60-day voyage, and a lot of the ships at that time really hadn't been designed for emigrants. And what would happen after the ship had made the trip west and came back with things from the east, they basically constructed a little deck over the hold of the ship and crammed these emigrants into these just squalid conditions. Historian Carl Wittke referred to them as being packed in like sardines in a barrel. So it was a very difficult voyage.
3 48ers hailing from Schleswig-Holstein that settled in Davenport are noteworthy not only for their splendid achievements in their adopted homeland, but because they were part of the same extended family. The family's patriarch and Davenport's most well-known 48er was Hans Reimer Claussen. Poor but self-motivated, Claussen was taught Latin by his local pastor before attending law school in Kiel, the present-day capital of Schleswig-Holstein. Before his forced immigration, he became an accomplished and respected lawyer and politician who used his great intellect and love of America's Constitution to fight against monarchical rule. After the failed revolution and his exclusion from the Danish king's general amnesty, he and his family immigrated to America, eventually settling in Davenport, Iowa. His son, Ernst Karl Ulrich Claussen, who as a teenager fought for liberty, democracy, and national unity in the Schleswig-Holstein War of 1848 to 50, became a junior partner in his father's Davenport legal practice. He eventually emerged from his father's shadow, becoming Davenport's mayor for 7 consecutive terms, a feat never matched in Davenport's history. Father and son are buried side by side in Davenport's Oakdale Cemetery, 4,000 miles removed from their homeland of Schleswig-Holstein. The third 48er member in the extended family was Hans Reimer Claussen's son-in-law, Christian Müller. In 1852, Müller helped found Davenport's Turnverein, adhering to the motto, freedom, education, and well-being for all. The Society's members combined their progressive democratic ideals with their love of physical exercise, adhering to Juvenal's dictate of a sound mind is a sound body. Like many of Davenport's 48ers, Müller's work ethic and indomitable will resulted in an extremely successful business career, with his lumber business dominating the local scene for close to a century. Dr. Yogi Reppmann's 1978 trip to the United States completely changed the arc of his life. While conducting research in Davenport's Putnam Museum, Reppmann discovered rare issues of Der Demokrat, a Davenport German-language newspaper known as Davenport's Low German Bible. Reppmann noted the paper was peppered with references to the Claussen and Müller families. What really caught the young historian's attention was a mention of Davenport's Müller Lumber Company, as there was another Müller Lumber Company in his hometown of Flensburg, located near the border of Schleswig-Holstein and Denmark. Could there be some type of connection between these two companies? Reppmann began writing his master's thesis in 1982. After several more trips to America and the passage of 11 years, the peripatetic Reppmann finally published his Ph.D. in 1993. In those 11 years, Reppmann's love affair with both America and the 48ers blossomed and matured. A curiosity had morphed into a lifelong passion, or, as some might call it, an obsession.
We should have a scientific biography, a PhD about that man, because a role model in many respects. His son, Ernst Claussen, with 16 years as a teenager, a warrior, a soldier in the war of Schleswig-Holstein against Denmark. And over here, the wife, the spouse of Hans Reimer Claussen, and you can read it here, Anine Claussen, born at Copenhagen, Denmark.
Fast forward another 13 years to a curious descendant of Jürgen Peter Ankersen, a 48er who settled in Davenport in 1853. After reading Reppmann's Ph.D. dissertation in the State Historical Society in Iowa City, Scott Christiansen sent an email to Reppmann. Christiansen had picked up on a reference to an individual in Reppmann's 707th footnote. Although the spelling of the name was slightly off, he had a hunch the man Reppmann had referred to was his 48er great-great-grandfather. On this tiny and most improbable foundation, a great friendship was built.
So I started trying to find every book I could to find out who these 48ers were, to learn a little bit more about my great-great-grandfather. I came across this book written by this fellow named Dr. Joachim Reppmann. How would I get in touch with the author of this book? Well, I looked a little further, and lo and behold, he had his email address written in the book. So if you know Yogi, this makes perfect sense. That is the man with 3,000 names on his email list. I really didn't expect to hear back from him, but lo and behold, I did hear from him. And eventually he was able to get me a copy of the actual letter itself, which was written by my great-great-grandfather, Jürgen Peter Ankerson, which was kind of exciting to see something that an ancestor of yours had written a century and a half ago.
I just was looking for many years for somebody who is passionate and interested, and Scott has now by far the largest digital library about Schleswig-Holstein 1848ers in the United States and in general.
If I could just interject, the relationship that these two guys have is so interesting. It's over something that probably is so boring to the majority of the people, and yet you listen to the passion that they both have, and you get caught up in it.
I think people understand what both of you do and why you love it so much.
No. I'm not even sure I understand it myself sometimes.
He's working 14, 16, sometimes 18 hours a day. I'm taking meals up to him, to his office.
I'm always struck with the fact that their lives were important, and so many people know nothing about them. And so it's important to me to kind of bring them back to life, let other people see what made these people special.
Every day doing the research, Scott and I learn more about this group, and it is an unlimited process, and probably sharing this interest, like the German proverb goes, shared grief is half grief, shared joys are double joys. We share the joy in doing this scientific research about 1848ers who came from Europe.
In the early spring of 2006, Yogi and his wife Gitta invited Scott and Carol to visit them at their home in Flensburg, located in Germany's northernmost state of Schleswig-Holstein, near the border with Denmark. The Christiansens gladly accepted the invitation and were picked up by the Reppmanns at the Hamburg airport that August. So began a life-altering friendship between the two couples that allowed Scott to better understand his roots by retracing his great-great-grandfather's footsteps over 160 years later. Davenport's German-American Heritage Center is a tangible testimonial to the 48ers' presence in Davenport. Founded on August 1st, 1994, the center seeks to both preserve and promote the town's rich German heritage.
Yogi, I think this is my favorite room at the German-American Heritage Center. There are a lot of interesting exhibits in this room. This photo here is of particular interest to me. One of the men standing to the side of the stone here is Jürgen Peter Ankerson. He's the one that planted the family flag for my family here in Davenport.
He was the founding president of that group.
He was that group's first president in 1872, and as the sign says, this is a unique organization in all of the United States, and it really reflects that Davenport was, you might say, the Schleswig-Holstein capital of the United States after these 48ers arrived.
Although Scott and Yogi have visited the Davenport's German-American Heritage Center on many occasions, the constantly changing exhibits make each new visit an exciting, educational, and enjoyable experience for the two 48er historians. As the two friends explore new exhibits and revisit old ones, they soon are transported a century and a half ago, when the 48ers were making their mark in their adopted home.
Janet was just educating me a little bit. My great-great-grandfather's grocery store was established, and we'll probably get a shot out the window, right almost directly across the street back in 1853. And this fine building that we're standing in, I thought had been built in the early 1870s, but Janet tells me that this portion of the building was actually built in 1861. It was known as the William Tell House.
As the two men engage in lively dialogue, they chuckle, realizing their discussion is once again returned to a subject they've discussed many times before, the life of America's most celebrated 48er, Carl Schurz.
So Carl Schurz, typical for a 48er, ahead of his time, just in a philosophical, general common sense way, could help us solving solutions, problems, challenges in America and Germany with our mass immigration we are facing these days.
Exactly. I started to reflect about my great-great-grandfather a century and a half ago. In his wildest dreams, could he ever have imagined that 160 years later, his great-great-grandson would be looking at a picture of him in a building that was being built across the street from his grocery at that time. Amazing.
Mind-boggling, very much.
You know, Yogi, when we were back at the monument yesterday down by the old Washington Square Park, it made me think about back in 2008 when the stone was rededicated, and how honored I was as a descendant of one of the men that stood behind the stone that day to write the interpretive sign describing the events of that day.
On March 24th, 1898, a huge throng of people gathered at Davenport's Washington Square Park to help a group of elderly war veterans commemorate the 50th anniversary of the day they began fighting for freedom.
This stone was really kind of the epicenter of Germans in Davenport at that time. Off to our side there we have the German American Heritage Center, which was an early German American hotel for recently arrived immigrants. Across the street from the German American Heritage Center, we have the location where my great-great-grandfather established his grocery store back in 1853. On the other side, we have what's now the YMCA, but it used to be Washington Square Park.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Davenport had been called the most German city, not only in the state, but in all of the Middle West, the center of all German activities in the state. Less than 2 decades later, however, the view of all things German had changed dramatically. America's entry into World War I ushered in an era of uber-patriotism, which often manifested itself in displays of anti-German sentiment. The stone dedicated by Schleswig-Holstein's freedom fighters, March 24, 1898, did not escape the tidal wave of anti-German hysteria rolling across the country. It was painted yellow, a popular way of scornfully identifying and defacing something having German ties, and tipped over. At some point, the huge red granite boulder disappeared from Washington Square, never to be seen again.
I guess I've thought a lot about it, how weird it is sometimes how history unfolds. I'm sure that those 48ers at that time in 1898 had no idea that this lovely monument that they were dedicating would 20 years later be defaced and destroyed. And I'm sure they had no idea that one of their descendants would one day play a part in righting that wrong and in recording for posterity what had gone on that day. So a very emotional experience for all of us.
In March of 2008, after much hard work by the American Schleswig-Holstein Heritage Society and the Schützenpark Guild, a stone commemorating the Schleswig-Holstein Kampfgenossen-Verein, 1848-50, was rededicated. Davenport had come full circle in honoring an important part of its roots.
And in America, here in Davenport, we have more activities going on to reflect on that democratic history in Germany than in Germany by itself. All are interested, involved in giving the 48ers from Schleswig-Holstein and Davenport more recognition, the recognition they deserve. And that is close to my heart.
You know, Yogi, one of the things that I've most enjoyed about our passionate hobby is the people that we've met over the years.
Today, Scott and Yogi will meet with another dedicated individual with a passion for preserving the symbols of Davenport's German-American history. Their friend, Corey Darnell, has been the driving force in restoring Davenport's Schützenpark.
Where we're at right now in the Schützenpark would have been an area that back in the day when the park was in existence from 1870 to 1923, this would have been nothing at that time. This would have just been a hillside in the park, kind of just a little out-of-the-way area. But because of all the redevelopment and the loss of all of our original buildings within the park, this is about the only place we had left to recreate a small portion of the park that was flat and easily accessible from the parking lot.
This site holds special meaning for generations of Davenport residents, especially those with German roots. In 1870, Davenport's Schützengesellschaft, a shooting association, created the Schützenpark, a shooting park reminiscent of those they'd enjoyed in the fatherland. Although founded as a venue at which men could hone their rifle marksmanship, it soon grew into a vital recreational and cultural haven enjoyed by thousands, including both German immigrants and those born in America.
But in the day when the park was open, you would have looked over here to the left and seen the magnificent inn at Schützenpark, where many events, indoor and outdoor, would have been held on the veranda. It had a 150-foot long bar. You know the Germans love to drink, and I think maybe 400 or 500 people probably could have been standing in there at one time. We would have had a 4-story tall white wooden roller coaster over here on the hillside that you could have seen above the tree line at one time.
Like the 48er stone, this symbol of German culture fell prey to World War I's anti-German hysteria. The final nail in the park's coffin was the 18th Amendment, which made quaffing a beer while listening to a band concert or relaxing at a picnic a crime. Thanks largely to the tireless efforts of one man, Corey Darnell, Schützenpark has slowly and surely been brought back to life, providing area residents not only with an important link to their town's cultural roots, but also with a beautiful and unspoiled park.
Corey, can you tell us a little bit about this streetcar station?
So yeah, this station was built in 1911. It was built in the Egyptian revival style, which there was so much interest in Egypt at that time that they built this in the style of basically an Egyptian mausoleum. The Schützengesellschaft was trying to figure out ways to get more and more people to the Schützenpark. So in order to do that, they built this actual waiting pavilion that people would ride out on the streetcar, would stop out here, let the people off, then it would turn around and go back down to Telegraph Road and then back down to downtown Davenport.
Corey is one of these guys that you wonder what motivates him. He's just, I think his profile's behind altruism in the dictionary. He just does a lot of things, doesn't ever ask for any recognition. Just one of these wonderful people that you and I have met pursuing our passion.
He is truly making a difference.
He really is.
Darnell's efforts on behalf of Davenport have not only brought Schützenpark back to life, they've brought honor and dignity to those who've departed this life. He's taken an active role in restoring and preserving Davenport's historical city cemetery. Recently, he surprised Scott by having a tombstone installed to mark the grave of Scott's great-great-grandfather's second wife.
It's just kind of weird when you think about it. These people were born 4,000 miles away and they end up being buried in another continent. It's strange to me. I guess I'm very provincial, but I can't imagine being buried 4,000 miles from where I was born. Then we went to Oakdale Cemetery, and a marvelous lady that works there, Deb Williams, took us around and showed us a lot of the 48er tombstones, and as you and I rambled on about our the history surrounding these people, I kind of spied out of the corner of my eye that she was really interested, that she was kind of being transported back with us back into the 19th century. Well, we're here in Oakdale Cemetery with Deb Williams, who's the authority on everything going on here at Oakdale Cemetery and knows everybody that's buried in Oakdale Cemetery, and she's going to lead us to the graves of 3 48ers.
And Hans, he's in Rennes 77. I was just out there last week looking for him. This is a cemetery map. This is the main gates. You're here. You're going to go up over the hill. And Mueller's right here across from Davenport, I know. Right. I think that we had talked about it when you came the last time. And then on over here, this is Claussen.
As a fitting and final stop on Scott and Yogi's Davenport visit, both pay their respects at the Oakdale Cemetery gravesites of several notable 48ers. Having written so much about these great men, one senses an almost familial communication passing between these departed 48ers and the men who've tasked themselves with keeping them in the public's consciousness by highlighting their many accomplishments.
It's kind of hard to put into words, but when you're standing before the remains of somebody that you've been working on for month after month after month to tell their life story, it's kind of a neat feeling.
Which is now southwest of Poland.
Okay, so Hans Reimer Claussen.
He, I believe, is behind that Martin stone there.
Hans Reimer Claussen, born in Fettering, little village northwest of Hamburg, son of a farmhand, but the local pastor realized, very bright guy, taught him Latin so he could enter university in Kiel, became a lawyer, became a politician at an early stage. 1848, he was elected to the first German parliament in Frankfurt.
Observing Scott and Yogi during their Davenport visit makes one realize they exhibit the same passion, dedication, and indomitable will exemplified by the 48ers. While some may never truly understand their obsession with this group of patriots and defenders of personal freedom, it's hard not to appreciate the impact the two have made in drawing our attention to this remarkable group of immigrants and their part in flavoring America's storied cultural melting pot. As Scott wrote several years ago, the 48ers could well be considered America's most remarkable and unique group of immigrants. They provided a cultural and intellectual transfusion which affected not only their fellow countrymen, but also had a pronounced effect on the political and social history of America during one of its most critical periods.
There's one question I've never asked you. Obviously, we share this passion for the 48ers. What really is the genesis of that passion for you?
Well, the main thing is, for me, whenever I do research about 48ers, reading your Forgotten 48er, the Wilhelm von Schürach story, it is timeless. Example, Karl Schurz, the main 48er, young student near Cologne, freed his professor out of Spandau prison near Berlin, came to London, married a lady from Hamburg, Margarete Meyer. Then they went together to America. She founded in Watertown, 1856, the first kindergarten in America, and he became Secretary of Interior Affairs under President Hayes, was involved in immigration policy. And when you read his concepts of those days, what Karl Schurz had in mind, how we should assimilate immigrants in Germany or America, these concepts are more needed nowadays than ever.
Some believe we study history in order to not repeat the mistakes of our collective past. Ironically, however, Scott and Yogi have worked hard unearthing a chapter of history that's worth repeating. The 48er Credo: freedom, education, and well-being for all is both timeless and timely.